and their role in disease production. And we'll continue to talk about this throughout the remainder of the semester as we touch on other topics such as epidemiology, immunology, etc. Now, one thing that people often wonder is, or maybe they don't wonder or didn't know, is there a connection between viruses and cancer? And the answer is a definitive yes. There are what are called oncogenic viruses, which mean viruses that can cause cancer. In fact, 10% of all the cancers in humans are caused due to a particular viral infection. And I'll give you an example. Cervical cancer, in many cases, is a direct result of infection by the human papillomavirus. In oncogenic viruses, their genetic material gets integrated into the host cell and typically causes what are called cytopathic changes, or changes in the shape and behavior of a cell, and that leads to, those changes in behavior lead to frequently the formation of cancerous cells. So I'll give you some other examples. I've already given you the human papillomavirus example in cervical cancer. 60% of Americans are infected with HPV. In most strains of HPV, it's a sexually transmitted disease, are completely harmless. You don't even know you have them. You get infected. You clear it from your body, and nothing happens. There are a couple of strains of HPV that cause genital warts, and there are a couple strains of HPV that are known to be linked to the formation of cervical cancer if you get infected with those particular strains. Another example is viruses in the family Adenoviridae. They can cause adenocarcinomas, which are cancers of glands in the body. Herpes viridae family contains several different viruses that can cause cancers. For example, HIV, the causative agent of AIDS, can cause Kaposi sarcoma, which is a rare type of cancer of blood vessels. Epstein-Barr virus is linked to a particular type of lymphoma. And hepatitis B infection left untreated oftentimes can lead to the development of liver cancer. In fact, in China, China has the highest rate globally of hepatitis B infection. It also has the highest rate globally of liver cancer cases among its population. Now, one thing to know about getting infected with a virus is that just because you become infected with a virus does not necessarily mean you will immediately know that you've been infected. Sometimes you can go for months or even years without demonstrating any symptoms of infection. When a virus does not immediately create symptoms in a patient, that's called it being in its latent period. Epstein-Barr virus can be latently carried in 9 out of 10 people in the population, and it may never develop into symptoms. Herpes virus can linger in the body for a lifetime and erupt at different times, and you can, for example, individuals who have cold sores, that's a type of herpes virus that can remain dormant for months or even years, and then during times of extreme stress when the body's immune system is already suppressed, that herpes virus can become active again and produce that unsightly cold sore that you don't like having. Chicken pox, after you've been infected with chicken pox, the chicken pox virus can linger in the body long after the signs of the infection have cleared, and at that point, later on in the life, can produce a very painful condition called shingles. Sometimes viral infections can be what we call persistent, which means your body just never clears them. They continue and persist in the body. They continue to create symptoms, and frequently persistent viral infections are fatal. And they often will have a gradual appearance, and then they'll get gradually worse and worse and worse. HIV, for example, that causes AIDS, if left untreated, that's kind of an example of a persistent infection that gradually gets worse and leads to death. Another one that you've probably never heard of is a persistent infection that some people get if they've become infected with measles. It's called subacute sclerosing panencephalitis, and this involves some damage to the brain, and it is fatal. Last thing I want to talk about very briefly are prions, and prions are not themselves viruses. What they are instead are proteins that can have a very damaging effect on their host. They are not viruses. They are infectious proteins. And you can get them by consuming foods that have prions in them. You can get them by receiving an organ transplant that contains these prions. You can get them off surgical instruments. And the best example of a prion that causes a disease is a prion that causes mad cow disease. In humans, the correlative, or the same disease in humans, is something called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. What prions do, this is a prion here. Again, it's an infectious protein. When it comes in contact with another protein that is in the similar class of compounds but is itself not a prion, it can induce a change in shape of the protein so that it takes on the same shape as the prion. So it changes the shape of another protein, and once that other protein's been changed shape into a prion itself, it then, every other protein it comes in contact with that's a similar type protein will change those proteins as well. And this can cause extensive damage, for example, to proteins in the brain, which is where Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease comes from. Obviously, I'm not covering prions in a great amount of detail here. I'm mentioning more so that you know what they are,